All right, well, hey, let's kind of kick off. So before the show started here, we were chatting just a little bit about breathing and oxygen and the relationship with the mitochondria and how we can kind of improve our health by paying a little bit more attention to our breath. And so I think that's a great place for us to just kick this thing off, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll see two approaches to what people are thinking are important in the breath work. And there's one approach that's sort of more now, and it's oxygenation of the blood and, your SpO2 and getting oxygen into the mitochondria. And it's a much more yang, much more, alpha activity.
Right.
And then there's the more yin, more passive, the longer, the much older approach to breathing, and that's more for control of your autonomic nervous system. And so when you see me lecture about detoxification, there's this huge emphasis around the autonomic nervous system, because so the autonomic nervous system, you've got the sympathetic and parasympathetic, and
Right.
in sympathetic, that's your fight or flight. Then parasympathetic, people think rest, digest, but it's rest, digest, repair, regenerate, detoxify.
Right.
That's all the regenerative aspect. And so sympathetic is, I got to be on, I got to do something. And, there may be danger involved, there may not. So when we make it a more dramatic difference, we're like, well, sympathetic, it's fight or flight, the tiger's coming out of the woods, and my God, I got to do something. But even under lower priority, it's like, I got to do something, I got to get something done. Or just during our day, yeah, there could be a danger aspect. We could feel this sense of danger. I gotta do this or that, or I'm gonna get in trouble. Regardless of how deep into sympathetic you are, there's a prioritization.
Right.
There's a prioritization of how you use your energy. And you're prioritizing towards this musculoskeletal thing. Your muscles and your brain got to have energy to do something. And you deprioritize all of these things in the regenerative side: the rest, digest, repair, regenerate, detoxify. And in the neurotransmitters, and this is important because there's this whole cascade. We're going to talk about detoxification. And so, right, so we're deprioritizing
Right.
detoxification, but we're going to see that we're going to start a neurotransmitter cascade, and it's got a reflexive action with the liver, and it's actually going to shut down liver processing.
Hmm.
So in the neurotransmitter balance, you've got glutamate and GABA as your two poles. Glutamate is more on it, and it's associated with memory. In fact, people with a lot of memory and a lot of intelligence have a lot of glutamate activity. Now, when part of that is, with memory comes memory of bad things, and fear comes along with that. So when that's hyperactivated, you start getting anxiety. That's when the glutamate receptors start going too fast. And when it goes really far, it generates something called neuroinflammation. And that's like this whole thing, this chaos that's going on in the brain. So that's glutamate. And then on the other side, you've got GABA, and that's chill neurotransmitter. It settles you down. And so the idea is that you're swinging back and forth between these poles. I got to do something. I got to run away from something if you're more primal. And then I'm going to sit down and chill out. And during the chill out, you get hungry and you eat. Now, why do you get hungry and you eat? Let's go back down to the liver from there. So the liver has a series of doors, and this is how we make detoxification work, right? And we'll come back to this when we get into detox. And so every cell in the liver is fed with blood on one side and drained on the other side with bile. And so it's moving this stuff out, toxins from the blood out into the bile, drain into the GI tract. And so there's a lot to unpack in there. So the toxins move with the bile and drain down into the GI tract. And so we're like, wait a second, bile, that's that stuff that's for digestion of our fats,
Right.
and we're all into fats these days. We're doing all this keto diet, and we need a lot of good bile flow.
Right.
Well, it turns out that transporters that move toxins are the same as the one that moves bile. And there's two of them, and they're sort of like a brother-sister pair. One moves bile and toxins, the other one just moves bile. And they upregulate and downregulate together. And it's that stream of the bile leaving all those cells in these little rootlets called the canaliculi into the common bile duct and into the GI tract. And that's where all your toxins go out. Now, that's also what generates digestion of your fats. And so when you're chill, that bile flow opens up, and brings stuff down for digestion and makes you hungry, but it's also bringing toxins out. But when you're locked up and tense, you actually shut off those transporters. And
Right.
so the bile doesn't come out, so you can't digest well, but the toxins don't come out either. And so there's this when we're sympathetic, we prioritize running away and doing stuff like that, and we deprioritize digestion and detoxification by locking up this transition from liver into the GI. And so the breathing exercises give us this chance to reset that balance between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And it's through those breathing exercises that you get control back over of the autonomics and you shift them back over.
Right. Yeah. Well, wow. So with the liver then, so again, and we should dive in a little bit into the diet and keto and maybe a little bit of animal versus plant-based. You don't have to get dramatic about it. But I think it's a hot topic right now. And it's really interesting. So then the more stressed we are, do we have to be concerned with fats in the diet? And then I guess the other thing is with stress, if we're in this kind of fight or flight more often than not, and we're down regulating that detoxification, is it as easy as let's get my nervous system back in check through a couple of box breathing rounds? Or over time, do I kind of keep that suppressed so much that I don't have the ability to get that engine running again? Is there some kind of major lag happening there?
Great question set there. And so you do train yourself away from using detoxification. And so you will start deprioritizing all of that chemistry of detoxification. And there's a number of ways that we do that, but being in that stress mode all the time is chronically upregulating all of this fight or flight stuff and
Right.
chronically deregulating or downregulating all of this detoxification. And so we can use our supplementation and our diet to upregulate all of those detoxification pathways and get glutathione processes up, glutathione production up, all of the enzymes and transporters that work with that. And that's how we do detoxification protocols. We're using supplementation to turn up those gene sets and prioritize those pathways. And we can even use supplements that help on the brainscape to try to get you back under control. And the most notable of those is CBD, which
Right.
works very well on a neurological level to get that neurotransmitter balance back in and get that autonomic back in. But I always want people to extend that down into their lifestyle and using these breathing techniques. Because if you approach it from both directions, it'll be the most powerful intervention to get that system up and working.
Yeah, and I mean, resonates a lot with me. I think a lot of the time I'm trying to get people to really appreciate the foundations and how important it's not as easy as just taking the pill, or even when there's an amazing pill or NAD, which I'm sure we'll talk about,
Mhm.
these really powerful things that we can now purchase or what have you and put into our bodies to upregulate all sorts of
Mhm.
amazingly beneficial processes. It has to be rested on this foundation of what I would call free medicine, right? Just breathing, mindfulness, exercise, sun exposure.
Awesome, awesome. Now, yeah, the free medicine, it has to rest on this right lifestyle, whether it's just diet. Like, oh, yeah, I'm going to take all this detox stuff and then I'm going to go out to McDonald's, or I'm going to be carb rich all day. I'm going to snack on candies all day. Like, how well you think that's going to work for you? But I love now, what's happened just since I started doing this in around 2008, 2009. And since then, at the time, I was very deep into Tai Chi and Qigong, some of the Tibetan interventions and the breathing exercises, and that was really not out here in the health place.
Right.
But it's really come forth since then, and it's become so accessible. And whether it's you're using your breathing interventions, or if it's mindfulness or vipassana, or if you're using tech to do it, if you're using binaural beats,
Mhm.
I mean, those things meditate you really quickly. But using these interventions to bring the nervous system under control on top of doing the supplement interventions. And then if you take that next step and you do that on top of the diet, you get all three of those, you have very powerful agents for change all together.
Right. And is there any risk associated with if somebody is just like hard charging, not sleeping a lot, super stressed out, takes the one of your liver detoxes, right? Is that a dangerous scenario? To what extent do we need to proceed or prepare our bodies for a detoxification protocol?
Well, I spent a lot of time really getting all the parts of detoxification together so they're unified in our protocols. If you're following our protocols,
Right.
you have the least potential for any kind of damage in there.
Right.
Yet, and if we hadn't laid them out like that, then you have a lot more potential for damage. And so, like, if we just back up and we say, how does detox work? So we need at a cell level to conjugate a toxin to something you make like glutathione. And then you need to dump it out of the cell. And then it's going to go into circulation. Then you need your filters, the liver, the kidney, the GI, and even the skin to be filtering out those circulating toxins, right? And in the beginning, we were focused more on these things that push toxins out of the cells, out of the tissues into circulation. And you'd run into more problems with people if they don't have the liver flowing, the kidneys flowing, GI. You would dump a lot of toxins into circulation and do what you call redistribution of toxins. And then you can dump them, you actually dump them preferentially into places that are inflamed and already damaged. So that was a bad thing. So you're more likely to have this damage. And so you'd have to really carefully prepare things. But now when we do that, we're always coupling it to increasing bile flow and having a lot of binders in the GI. So remember, the toxins are going out on the bile stream, the green river down to the GI. And then you need things like charcoal and zeolites and IMDR metal binder to bind all that up. And as long as you got that flowing, dumping and catching, dumping and catching, dumping and catching, you have very little risk. But you're also going to have very little benefit if you don't just settle down a little bit. You got to take that one step back. And it's not that you have to go, because you'll give a detox, system to someone who's type A.
Right.
And what'll they do? They won't do it because they be like, well, no, I know I have to take like 3 weeks off and I have to go up to the mountains and I got to be in my Zen retreat and I got to be right next to the bathroom and I got to do all the right stuff. And it's like, it's not that. And it's not, you just take it and don't worry about it.
Right.
Clear a little bit of space in your time. Moments for meditation are every moment. They're right now. Moments to rest are right now. I did something. Just going to ground myself a little bit.
Right.
I'm just going to feel myself into this space here. They're all the time around us. And all we have to do is recognize that space around us and create those little micro retreats throughout our day. And that's all you really got to do.
I love that, micro retreats. And I think, to your point, it's as easy as one breath,
It is.
Inhale and see how long you can exhale for.
Yeah. And so you teach those little, your box breathing and stuff. They're like little interventions throughout the day, the micro retreats. And as long as you're doing that, you're starting to get yourself back into that swing, that back and forth, sympathetic, parasympathetic, sympathetic, parasympathetic.
Right.
And that rhythm, that's the rhythm of the Tao. And this is what the body lives on. And this is what creates the integrity of the cell, not just the cell, but the integrity of the whole system. I came upon this amazing paper the other day, and it was because I was like titrating up my NAD levels and my energy so high that this is what my friend Avi Hershkowitz saw. He says, because you're in that state, you found this paper. And and it was this paper, and it was measuring this resonant fluorescence of NADPH, which is one of the NAD pools. And NAD, like when the cell's healthy, it just has this fluorescence. If you're making it fluoresce, it has a resonance, an oscillation to it, and that's tied to the membrane. So membrane health is a huge part of integrity of the whole system. And when we get into talking about AMPK activation and keto diets and supplements that do that, we're going to see that one of the things that they do is increase membrane polarity, called the membrane potential, and that leads to the cells sticking working together, tight junctions get stronger, and you get all this integrity in the system. And when you got that integrity, there's this oscillation. And in this, they were measuring, this nice pulsing oscillation, and then they washed the cells with mercury to sort of poison them out a little bit. And the oscillation broke down, it decoupled, and it was no longer in this resonant pulsing. So it was deresonated, and the membranes depolarized. And the cells that they were using were immune cells. So the immune cells usually like looking around, it finds a bacteria, it encounters it, sticks to it, pulls it in, and eats it. And as the cell loses the polarization and the inner energy generating NAD is lost its harmony, the cells aren't able to engulf the bacteria anymore. They just sort of bounce off of them.
Right.
And throughout the whole system, and inside the cell, you've got nothing but all these organelles that are just made out of membrane. The mitochondria, of course. So we'll talk about mitochondria a lot because they're generating all of your energy. And they're a shell of a membrane, and then inside all this folded up membrane.
Right.
And in there, the membranes have these things called membrane potential. And the membrane potential, it's like a voltage potential across a capacitor. And it generates energy and then it pops through. And that's what's making the enzymes drive, and it's what's making the resonance with these things inside. And the whole thing's like humming. And then the endoplasmic reticulum is just like football fields of membrane all folded over. And they're driving most of your hormone transformations. And they're driving your synthesis of proteins and the folding of proteins and bringing them into their proper shapes. And that's like you need those membranes just humming. And when they lose their integrity, the whole system loses its ability to drive all these reactions. And then it has to prioritize. It can't just say, I'm going to do it all. And I was like, oh, what can I get done today? It's like the exhausted person. And then it's got to do one thing over another, and all these things fall by the wayside, and the integrity and vitality of the system just start to fall off. And that's why I like there's sort of a new vitalism coming back now that, it used to be vitalism versus reductionist chemistry, but now it's all sort of coming together. We understand how the biochemistry creates the vitalism. And when the vitalism is there and the integrity of the system is there, it's all held together, the system's able to accommodate the toxic world we're in, the microbes around. But when you lose the integrity, all of a sudden, even if I don't change your toxin level, you become toxic.
Right.
Because the toxin, the thing we call a toxin, is just a chemical.
Right.
Until it's striking something and impacting its function in the cell. Then that's the toxic activity. In fact, there's a very cool paper I have, and it's the title is Concurrent Inflammation as an Indicator of Susceptibility to Toxicity from Xenobiotic Agents. So xenobiotic agents are just these chemicals that come into you, and they're not even toxins until you can't deal with them anymore. And it's saying when inflammation goes up, detoxification goes down. This is one of my fundamental teachings. When inflammation goes up, detoxification reactions that are happening all the time turn down. And all the time, these detoxification reactions are taking toxins away from points in your cell where they act on the chemistry, where they act as toxins.
Right.
It's always conjugating them and pushing them away from the cell.
Right.
When they stop doing that, they come in, they bind to an enzyme, they bind to a membrane, and that's the toxic manifestation. Right. So when the integrity goes down, the toxins that were there all the time suddenly start killing you.
Swarming.
Yeah. And when the integrity is up, then you can deal with them all.
That makes total sense. So I think we talk a lot about this sort of mismatch hypothesis, right? The modern world, and that's where biohacking was born. But what you're saying is not only are we kind of exposed to a lot more of these toxins or toxin potentials, but at the same time we're exposed to more, our capacity to deal with them is being reduced.
Yeah.
And that ties to the stress response in many ways.
Yeah. There's a dialogue that we're seeing way more toxins than we ever have.
Right.
And it's true and not true. There's times in the last 100 years, 200-300 years, where we're in a vastly more toxic environment. Right. At the height of the industrial age, it was a disaster around here. But why are we so susceptible to everything now? Why are we feeling so toxic now?
Right.
Yeah, there's probably more different types of toxins. But I'd argue that the net of everything is turning down the vitality of the system to deal with everything. And what you're calling the stress response is that inner response inside the cell. NRF2 is the most common stress response, that when the stressors build up, you send a signal into the nucleus to turn up all of your detoxification chemistry.
Right.
And that's just not working so well anymore.
So what are we to do? uh, okay. So now when we think about this sort of the health of our cell, right? Because with this membrane you talked about, so is that nutrition? How do we keep that thing optimally healthy? And then how do we keep the organelles inside of it? You mentioned the mitochondria. You mentioned the endoplasmic reticulum, which I haven't said these words for 15 since I was in college. But how do we keep these things
keep all
healthy?
that healthy?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'll do a little bit of a historical thing.
Okay.
When I was first making detoxification protocols, I was focusing on this NRF2 upregulation. I wanted to turn up the ability of the cell, or turn up the cell's transcription of genes that made glutathione, that made the enzymes that link the toxins to the glutathione, and turn up the activity of the transporters that kick it out of the cell. So remember, in detoxification, it's link it and push it out.
Right.
And so let's turn all that up, and then the body will get better. Now, I was putting a lot of stuff in there that, I'd read in the literature were NRF2 upregulators, but I'm also, I have a PhD and all that stuff, but I spent so much time in the caves as I was a Taoist, a Dzogchen, tantric. I'm a pretty intuitive, energy sensitive guy, and so I was like, well, I know these got to go in here, but on the list of how powerful they are, NRF2 upregulators are just not that great, but I know they're good, and so I stuck a lot of stuff in there along with like lipoic acid. I knew it was doing what I wanted it to do. I do liposomal glutathione to get some glutathione in there. We had the binders on board. And fast forward a couple of years into the new keto world.
Right.
And so this is all probably the fault of the Dark Lord, the Sith Lord, Joe Mercola. Joe Mercola comes up to me, the Dark One himself, at PaleoFX, and he squeezes the fat around my abdomen, and he says, Chris, we got to do something about this. This is way too much visceral fat. Your CRP is probably through the roof, and you're going to die. And I'm like, all right, Joe, taunt taken. And my CRP is 0.5. And he's like, but that's just because you have so much glutathione.
Yeah.
And so he's like, here's what you got to do. And he was all into mTOR blocking and fat adaptation and intermittent fasting. And so he gets me on these intermittent fasts, and he's like, yeah, you got to do this for 30 days, and you got to do a 4-day water fast. And like, I'm not so compliant of a guy, I'm the biochemical biohacker. I'm not the like super compliant guy. And so I'm like 6 days into this, I'm like, fuck this, Joe. And so I go into my lab, and I've done all this research on what are these things that are mTOR blockers. And so I put them all into these nanoparticles, and I start taking them in these nano format. And I happen to find a keto strip somewhere, and I pee on it, and it turns black, and I'm like, good Lord, is that real? And I'm like, I'm not supposed to go into ketosis until, the second month of doing this stuff.
Yeah.
And so I get blood meters, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm cranking ketones. This is pretty cool. And I was not on a keto diet. I was just intermittent fasting. And so I realized that these plant-based compounds were driving this process. And so I start looking up all that, and all he turned me on to was mTOR. And so I find that upstream from all that is AMPK activation.
Right.
And this is what's activated when you exercise heavily, when you intermittent fast, when you water fast, when you're on a keto diet. AMPK is this thing that's activated. And yeah, in the keto sense, that's what's activating PPAR alpha and adipose triglyceride lipase that mobilizes the fats, brings them to the liver, and you turn them into ketones and you use that as your fuel.
Got it.
But also there's all this other stuff that comes with that. That's where you're getting the insulin sensitization.
Mhm.
That's where you're moving, fat out of your liver out. But turns out that it also turns up polarization of the membranes and tight junction formation. And so
Oh, wow.
that's responsible for tying up leaky gut, leaky liver. I find this paper on leaky liver. Like, who's talking about a leaky liver?
I didn't know it could leak.
I know. Well, it does, And then my friend's like, well, there's leaky vagina, there's leaky liver, there's leaky blood-brain barrier. I'm like, leaky vagina? Jesus Lord. And all that goes back to this lack of integrity. The system's falling apart. And when it's carb fed all the time, it's just falling apart because it's only supposed to be carb fed when you come upon a stash of carbs, and it just doesn't happen all the time. You're more natural to be in this meat and fat diet all the time.
Right.
And so it's just when you get the carbs, what do? You flip away from all that. You're mTOR forward, and you're stashing all this energy for later use.
Right.
And then when you run out of that, then you start burning it up and you go back to a very clean cardiometabolic efficiency.
Right.
And the other thing that comes up with the AMPK and that I found with the leaky liver was my favorite new term, Canaliculi Trafficking. Well, I'm sorry, Joe. I was flying out to do this podcast with you, and I was stopped at Denver Airport for Canaliculi Trafficking. Not only do they do a body search, they're now reaching up into my liver.
Oh, boy.
So Canaliculi Trafficking is that movement of bile that I was talking about.
Right.
So the dumping of bile out of the hepatocyte into the bile tree and all that movement. So what are the kind of things that block that? See, this is how this whole thing gets on this downward spiral. So what blocks that? The most common thing that blocks that dumping of the bile is inflammation from endotoxin. Where's the endotoxin coming from? Mostly from leaky gut.
Right.
It could be coming from, why are we so sick? Dentistry's a big problem there. And so root canals get these infections under them, where we pull out wisdom teeth, have these infections called nicos or cavitations. Periodontitis, infections in the gums, bring endotoxin. These are little parts of bacteria into circulation and wind up inflammation.
Wow.
And so that's blocking that. Our stressors are blocking that. In the hormone world, estrogen dominance blocks that flow of bile out. And what does estrogen do in the neurotransmitter space? It upregulates the glutamate activity. So the glutamate's receptivity to the glutamate receptor's receptivity to the amount of glutamine goes way up, and it hyperfires. And what does that lead to? Irritability and anxiety. That's estrogen dominance.
Oh.
And what's the opposite of that? Progesterone. When you give a woman progesterone, what does it do? It's like the chill pill. And why? Because it creates GABA metabolites that stimulate the GABA activity. And if you taste it, it's like the bitterest stuff in the world, progesterone. And what does it do in the liver? Opens her right back up. And so you see these processes that are going on, these yin and yang with go and stop, engage and calm down. And then this yin and yang with fed and fasted.
Right.
And in this fasted state, you amplify all of this tightening up of the biochemistry, including the insulin resistance, but at a tight junction level, at a membrane polarization level, and then this level of mitochondrial biogenesis. And so what are those plant-based molecules? Remember, plants kill you. This is my dig at the carnivore doctor. No, they don't all kill you. Berberine, resveratrol, quercetin, diindolylmethane. People think about it for estrogen metabolism, but it's an AMPK activator. Silymarin is the milk thistle extract is a fantastic AMPK activator, and it's a stabilizer of the canalicular membrane. It stabilizes the bile flow. And all of these also then lead towards NAD production and mitochondrial biogenesis, which is making more mitochondria. So we want to tighten up the membrane polarity and make these membranes fire more energy. And then we want to generate more mitochondria. And that happens through the fasting, but it also happens with these nutraceuticals. So we can blend them and get even deeper effects.
That's amazing. So is this sort of, are we playing now into when we talk about AMP, are we talking autophagy? So in other words, when you're fixing your gut, if your gut is leaky, and when you take all these AMP activators, you are, as I understand, especially from Mercola's work, those are, if you're fasted and you take a lot of these things, you're going to get deeper into that
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
ketotic state
Yeah.
where your body can kind of fix itself,
Mm-hmm.
right? So is that part of this? And then is that like in a carb heavy environment, maybe a stressed carb heavy environment where even if you took an AMP activator, there's too much work to be done.
You're working against the tide there.
Right.
All right. So you want to work with the tide. That's why you want to integrate at least intermittent fasting in with taking these AMPK activators. So what is AMPK? So we all know ATP, the cellular energy molecule. That's adenosine triphosphate. It's got 3 high energy phosphate bonds. And then it donates one and it becomes ADP, adenosine diphosphate. And it donates another, and then it's AMP, adenosine monophosphate. It's got nothing more to give. It can't give the last one. So that AMP molecule then sticks into the AMP kinase. It's a recognizer of AMP buildup, which means you've burned off a lot of energy. And that is the primary signaler to go out and bring more energy. And you think it's just keto. No, it mobilizes glycogen. It increases glucose transporters, so you're more effectively using glucose. That's why it increases glucose sensitivity and insulin sensitivity. And it's mobilizing fat from deposition into sources, and then you can turn it into ketones. Now, the AMP buildup gives you like a 10x upregulation of AMPK, but then there's a way to super speed it up, give another 100x on. And this comes in from the supplements, but it also comes in from a couple of chemicals that are released when you're fasting. And so that supercharges it. So diet will give you this temporary, AMP increase over ATP because you've used it up, and that'll activate it to a certain degree. But it gets much more activated if you're fasting and exercising, or if you're fasting and you're taking these different supplements that are AMPK activators. But so then you brought up mTOR too. So that's another thing that happens. So part of AMPK activation is to block mTOR and activate ULK, which is activating autophagy.
Okay.
So mTOR has forward and blocked. That's the mammalian target of rapamycin. It's driven forward dominantly by insulin. And forward is lay down mass, build up mass. That's why doing too much ketogenic stuff on like a young kid or a teenager, they don't put on enough mass. So insulin's driving forward and proteins drive forward, most notably the branched chain amino acids like leucine. In fact, there's a product called Betator for driving mass buildup, and that's a leucine metabolite that's 20 times stronger than leucine. And these are things that we need. Old people with sarcopenia, they need more laying down of mass.
Right.
But if you never block mTOR, you build up all this aberrant mass. And so you'll see these weightlifters, like, you want to build mass, you do sugar and protein, and you will build some mass, man.
Get that insulin up.
And they can be ripped and have fatty liver at the same time. So fatty liver is from never, in fact, especially non-alcoholic fatty liver, it's from never fasting, never blocking mTOR, never turning on the lipophagy, eating the fat out of the liver. And so when you block mTOR through AMPK activation, any way you get there, then you concurrently activate ULK, which turns up autophagy, and then you burn off all the extra fat. You burn off bad proteins. So like there's fatty liver, there's actually depositions of bad proteins. And they'll be in the endoplasmic reticulum and most notably in the mitochondria. And it's called the unfolded protein response. You'll start building a protein and it won't quite be right. And it's like a residue. It's like junk in your cell, and you have to get rid of it. You have to pull it in these lysosomes and degrade it back to its amino acids, and then you can reuse those. And then you have a mitochondria that's just damaged. It's just like this mitochondria is over the edge, and you'll pull that in, you'll digest it. That's called mitophagy. So autophagy is self-eating. Then
Right.
there's specific. Mitophagy is eating the mitochondria. Endoreticulophagy is eating the endoplasmic reticulum. Lipophagy is eating the fat. And so you're activating all these things, and you're cleaning up and clarifying. That's why we have an epidemic, not in your world, but in the mainstream America, of non-alcoholic fatty liver.
Right.
The easiest way to get a great, really fatty liver is to do it just like they do to the freaking geese over in France and stuff corn into them all day. Carbs all day long is mTOR forward all day long, building up fatty deposition. The opposite of that is AMPK activation. And the more you put on top of each other, you fast, you exercise, and take AMPK activators, whoosh, you really charge that up. But as the carnivore MD said, yeah, these guys are like just mTOR block all the time. And what happens? And so this happened to Joe. So Joe, if he's going to do something, the other Joe, Mercola,
He's
he
all
goes
in.
all in. Like he's all in. And he was like empty. He was calling me up like 2 years ago about mTOR blocking. Maybe it was 3. And he was just like mTOR block, mTOR block, mTOR block. And then we do a podcast, and it's like video. And I'm looking at the dude, and he's gaunt and gray. He's like, and we get done. I said, Joe, you look like shit. He goes, no, I'm healthier than ever. I'm like, you think you're healthier than ever? And like all of us were saying the same thing at the same time. And so then by the time he like pinched my fat, he had come off of that.
Yeah.
And he was starting to do, 4 days like that, 3 days eating complex carbs and stuff. Oh, we're back to the Tao.
Yin
How
and
about
yang.
that? Yeah, and he looked freaking great. The guy's an animal now. He's really looking good now. But it was, I mean, it's all that pendulum swing.
Right, right. Well, and I think sometimes there's an amazing benefit to that. If we think about like, somebody that's on a very plant-based diet as an example, when they reintroduce any nutrient-dense meat, it's this like hyper-responsive thing. So maybe occasionally that's good, and that ties into like seasonal eating. And
oh yeah, no, absolutely. And it's not like, oh, we're going to be perfectly balanced
don't
every
wait
week.
until you
There's
go
gotta
gray.
be,
And
but you don't want to go too far, and you don't want to be too balanced.
Right.
There is strengths to where you go really deep into it. That the longer you go mTOR blocking, the deeper you're going to go in and clear out residue.
Right.
And so if you've got cardiovascular disease, or if you've got cancer, you're going to want to do this pretty deeply. And the thing with the plant-based diets, and you see they're interventional. Veganism is a great intervention against cardiovascular disease, cancers, where there's an overgrowth of schmutz throughout the body. We talked about schmutz before. We got to de-schmutz the body.
De-schmutz the body.
De-schmutz the body. And if you do a plant-based diet with too much carb, that's never going to work. And so you see, they're kind of like, okay, low fat, low carb, low protein, no protein, and they get it to work. But when you look at the list of what are AMPK activators, like I got this great paper, and it's like, it's everything plant-based that's good is an AMPK activator. So it's like every spice and all the garlic and alliums and all these things. And they're all AMPK activators. Now, we choose ones that are the best, and we want ones that are AMPK activators and probably sirtuin activators too.
Right.
And maybe they're bioflow activators. That's how I choose my pairing to get all that together. But that's why the plant-based interventions work so well, is because when they're doing it right, they're going towards ketosis, and they're mTOR blocking AMPK activating primary, secondary mTOR blocking.
Right. Let's dive into that mitophagy and mitochondrial biogenesis, because I think that's, you briefly touched on cancer, and I'm really interested in the metabolic theory of cancer and the mitochondria and the role that they play in that. Now, when we are never getting that AMPK, or never getting ourselves into a fasted state, or never getting that autophagy, we don't break down those mitochondria that are dysfunctional. right? And I think that's a big root of a lot of these issues. And I know you're doing a lot these days with different things to support the mitochondria. And I know I've been taking a few of your products, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit about how do we care for our mitochondria outside of fasting, because we know that that's good, and how do we take them to the next level?
Yeah. All right. So, and we're going to talk more from a supplementary level because I'm the supplement guy. But we know fasting, exercise are going to help build those.
Right.
So, first, let's just hit on detoxification. So, what breaks down your mitochondria? Heavy metals are total poison for the mitochondria. Mitochondria are made with a certain chemistry that's able to adapt to little bursts of oxygen-free radicals. But the trade-off is that they're very susceptible to heavy metals. And heavy metals will pull the antioxidant reservoirs out, like the glutathione levels will pull those out of the mitochondria and beat down the mitochondria.
Oh, wow.
And so the most common symptoms around, say, mercury toxicity, neurologically, you have hyperactivation of the glutamate receptors. And remember, that puts you into sympathetic, and that gives you anxiety. So anxiety is a big symptom of mercury toxicity, and fatigue is. Fatigue through burning out the mitochondria, very damaging to them, burning out the thyroid, burning out the adrenals. So all the energy generators go down. All right, so we need to get toxins out of there, and mold toxins are really bad for mitochondria too. Plus, they block NRF2 upregulation, so they block the ability of the cell to respond to this hormetic stressor.
Right.
All right, so now we want to build more mitochondria. So we need healthy membranes. Remember, they're a big folded up membrane. So one of the oldest interventions in the German biological medicine was phosphatidylcholine and different phospholipid sources. Now, phospholipids are what your cell membranes are made out of. They're what the membranes of the mitochondria and the different organelles are made out of.
Right.
And you can get them in plant source from lecithins. And so lecithin is an emulsifier that's used in food production, and you can purify phosphatidylcholine out of there to a very high purity, and you can take it, or what we do is we make all of our liposomes out of it. So all of our delivery systems, nanoliposomes, nanoemulsions, are made out of phosphatidylcholine, or we'll make empty ones that are just tons of phosphatidylcholine. So phosphatidylcholine helps build membrane integrity, and that will help you build a strong mitochondria that has that membrane potential and is able to generate energy. In fact, to go back to the Dark Lord, one of my triumphs in life is when I went to a retreat with Joe Mercola, Ben Greenfield, Robert Slovak, and a couple other guys, and Mercola had brought his new device for measuring membrane potential. It was it's looking at a refractive index or something, and you got some electrodes in your feet and hands, and we'll see what your number is. It's all a numbers game. Who's got the highest number?
Got it.
And so they all get to this. There was
That's
two
what you
houses.
do when you party with Mercola. Huh?
Yeah. So. Exactly. It's a little different when you party with Ben and some of the film producers that were with me. We all had our things that we did. Yeah. And so Mercola's got it hooked up at this one house, and I'm lagging behind, doing a treatment on somebody at the other house. And me and the guy stayed up the night before drinking Italian wine, and this other guy is a Quicksilver supplement junkie, so he takes all this PC. Yeah. We get there last, and I'm the last guy that they measure, and I just beat the pants off all of them, right? So I smoke out Greenfield and Mercola in, my membrane strength score. And Joe's like, why is this? And Emily Givler, who's there, who's from methyl DNA, methogenomics, says, it's because of the PC he takes. That's what builds the membrane. So PC is the easiest way to build membrane integrity, and that's building an integrity in the mitochondria. But now we want to make more mitochondria, and we want to eat old, dead mitochondria. Get rid of the bad, rebuild the new. And so we need some of this mitophagy, and we need it coupled to mitochondrial biogenesis. So when you AMPK activate, you should get both of these. So you're going to activate this ULK to go into this, make lysosomes and do the mTOR blocking and the mitophagy. Then there's something called PGC1 alpha or PGC1A,
Okay.
and it triggers mitochondrial biogenesis, which is the synthesis of new ones. And it has two steps to it. First, activated AMPK has these phosphorus groups, and so it phosphorylates PGC1A, and that's the first activation.
Okay.
But then there's something that's a silencer on it called an acetyl group. So you need a deacetylase. And if you remember sirtuins, the sirtuins, which are anti-aging genes.
I was going to say, that's your anti-aging gene. That's the big buzzword right now.
Yeah. So a sirtuin is actually a protein, and it's a deacetylase, and it takes the silencer off. And then the PGC1A is fully activated, and the mitochondria are made. The first step was reliant on AMPK activation. So you're doing your fasting, your exercise, your supplements that activate it, you get that first step. But the second step, the sirtuin activation, relies on adequate NAD levels. So this starts our whole NAD conversation. Now, there's two things. One is you need a higher NAD to NADH ratio. And during the fasting AMPK activation, you shift over to higher NAD over NADH. So NAD is the oxidized form, and NADH is the reduced form.
Okay.
And NAD in the cell is helping drive the citric acid cycle and the oxidation of carbon substrates. And so the oxidized form is taking electrons off of the carbon substrates, reducing itself to NADH, and in the process, oxidizing the carbon substrate. That's how we generate energy. Then that NADH goes through the ATP cycle to generate an ATP. So it's supposed to keep going like that. So you need a high potential of oxidized NAD to drive metabolism of carbon substrates.
Right.
Now, if you're eating sugars all the time, you end up reducing too much of the NAD. Now you have higher NADH than NAD. So the sirtuin activation needs higher NAD, the oxidized form, over NADH, and it needs an adequate level of the two. So the fasting is switching you to the right ratio of oxidized to reduced, but you don't always get to the high enough level. As we age, so NAD is so cool. So for years in anti-aging, we've been looking at all these things that go down with time.
Right.
DHEA goes down with time. Glutathione goes down with time. And then you supplement them, and you think you're going to bring this person back from the dead. And it helps, but it just doesn't quite get all the verve back in the tank, you know?
Right.
You're not swaggering around. You just feel a little bit better. And
Right.
NAD seems to be the one thing underpinning all the drop downs.
Got it.
And when you bring that back up, all
reverse
kinds
engineers
of stuff,
everything else.
everything else starts coming back up, right? And so if you are doing these things for AMPK activation, you're looking for mitochondrial biogenesis, but you don't have enough NAD, you can't get that second step and you can't come all the way through.
Right.
And so we need to supplement that. So why does it go down with time? There's two reasons. One, the base enzymes that are creating the precursors to NAD are going down with age. And on the back end, you're using it all up. Whenever you have any damage to your genes, you start sucking NAD into what are called PARPs, which are enzymes that repair damage to the DNA. And so with age, with toxic exposure, with inflammatory problems, you start getting more DNA damage and you start sucking the NAD into those situations.
Right.
And as you start losing barrier integrity, like if you're not going into those AMPK activations and restoring barriers, if you're not taking breaks from food, if you're stressing that system, then NAD gets sucked into trying to repair those. And so NAD is going down. And when NAD is down, you can't activate sirtuins and you can't have all of that real regenerative stuff. And that's where we come in with the NAD precursor supplementation, which would be previously it was nicotinamide riboside. Now with our NAD Gold, we do a nanoliposomal delivery of NMN, with some TMG, and then you tie the whole thing together.
Yeah, for sure. And I want you to go into that more because I've been on nicotinamide riboside for like a year and I never really felt anything. And a week on NMN and it's a whole new world and it's awesome.
I know. It's like, I'm Superman again. Watch me do this.
Now it sounded to me, so when you're talking about that ratio of NAD plus to NADH, and in the context of a high carb diet, you end up mismatching that rate. You end up flopping that, and you're then inhibiting mitochondrial biogenesis because you don't have the resources available or you're not being efficient. Is that a carbohydrate? Is that an anaerobic metabolism? So in other words, in a heavily carbohydrate fueled metabolism, I would imagine, and a lot of the things that I've kind of written about is you're going to preferentially burn carbohydrate because that's what you're giving your body. So why would your body learn to burn fat if you have 6 slices of bread in your gut?
Yeah, and why, why do we preferentially go to carbohydrate metabolism? And if you look way back in time, when we were cavemen and then hunter-gatherers and stuff, we didn't have high carb access to anything high carb, except once in a while you come up upon a tree that's blooming with some fruit.
9 berries.
Yeah, and whoom. Yeah. And what do? You stick it you store it.
Right.
And then you slowly bring it out and, you're using glucose, you're using different things. But when you go into the fasted state, then you start using fat preferentially.
Right.
And it's just that it was so seldom that we saw carb that we would take it in and store it very quickly. And so the insulin resistance comes with the carb use because you want to limit how much of that immediate supply of carb you use and you want to store more of it.
Right.
And then when you flip over to a more fasted, fat generated state, you go into a more efficient glucose metabolism. So if you had a month around all this stuff, you went into insulin resistance so you could store it for later and use it later.
Got it. And then later never comes.
And later never comes because it's this century and then we're all got fatty liver.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. So now I would love you to chat just a little bit about the 2 products that I've been taking from you, which is the One.
Yep.
Which is awesome. And then just recently your new NAD supplement that by the time this goes out, I think it'll be live.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things about the supplement industry and one of the reasons why I've kind of personally gravitated towards your stuff is that we hear everywhere it's not regulated and it's useless and you're peeing out all your nutrients and they're a waste of money. And that's like what the other camp kind of wants you to believe. Yeah. And then, but the danger these days, and I think the danger with Amazon, to be honest, is anybody can start a supplement company tomorrow, throw it on Amazon, a couple of buzzwords. But one of the things that really got me thinking is when I was researching your product, you had a video on your website and you were like, I've been trying to structure this for 3 years. And I don't know what that means, but I don't think many supplement companies are taking that kind of amount of time to create a product. And when you take the product, you feel it instantly, unlike a lot of other things. So can you tell me about this liposome thing you're doing? And specifically, what am I taking with the One and your new product? Because it's like Superman in a bottle.
Yeah. And so winding all that back. So there was the supplement industry problems of when what they said was in there wasn't in there.
Right.
And so that's been addressed and, all the laws are in place to make sure GMP is being followed. There's still bad actors there. But if you get into the professional supplement space and the high-end supplement space, I mean, you're here in Santa Monica, you go to Air One, you got all the high-end stuff, right? Everything they say is in there.
Right.
But does it work? So our approach is very next generation, this human 2.0, maybe it's supplement 2.0, but I want human 2.0 from it. And it's delivery. How do you get it from outside your body to inside your body?
Right.
And we're not going to use a needle. We're not doing IV here. Yeah. And a lot of these things that have all this promise, like resveratrol or berberine, are just so miserably absorbed. You get very, very low blood levels. And so you take all this stuff, but it's not changing your life. And it absorbs over such a slow time period that it never gets to the levels it needs to have the hormetic effects or gene upregulation effects. So I first got into this because I was trying to solve mercury detoxification. I
Right.
needed to get glutathione into the body, but your stomach, if you take it in a capsule, breaks it down. And then all you have is some amino acids. And so I was led to this family of lipid or fat-based delivery systems called nanoparticles, lipid nanoparticles, the first of which was the most commonly known is called a liposome or liposome. So it looks like a tiny cell. It's a phospholipid bilayer membrane making a sphere that encloses a little water droplet. And I've got glutathione dissolved in that water droplet, or I've got B vitamins, or something that I want high delivery of. And when you take it into your mouth and you hold it in your mouth, if you do it right, and there's all these liposomes out there that are just like, oh, I got liposomes too. It's just junk. If you do it right and you make them small enough into this nano size, they'll passively diffuse right through the mucous membranes into the capillaries in your mouth and go right into circulation. In the blood uptake studies that we have, the B12 study, in 2 minutes, boom, there was significant amounts of B12 in the blood.
Right.
And then like our CBD uptake and resveratrol uptake, you're peaking in the blood between 15 and 25 minutes after you hold this stuff in your mouth. It's like, boom.
Yeah.
With that product, we have a product called Keto B46. That one's just radical. You're taking stuff that everybody takes, berberine, resveratrol, quercetin, but you absorb so much of it. You absorb it so fast, and it's in an unmetabolized. So your stomach, when it absorbs things, changes it as you absorb it.
Right.
So you get it unmetabolized in, and it's such a strong AMPK activator that I can take somebody who's never been in keto before, give it to them in the morning, and an hour and a half later, as long as they don't eat carbs that morning, hour and a half later, they're making blood ketones.
And what levels are you seeing there?
Oh, one millimolar, no problem.
Amazing.
Usually 0.8 to 1.6. Occasionally someone will
Which a lot of people can't get there. Even a lot of times, people, even on a ketogenic diet, maybe they're taking some MCT in their coffee. They're going to hover at 0.5.
Yeah, they get a little bit, but this takes you all the way there.
Unless you're in a 3-day fast, you probably aren't going to get into 1.5, whatever.
Yeah, we can do that in a day.
Yeah.
How many other supplements can do that? None of them. And that's because of this delivery system. Fast and furious, get high blood levels, make all those changes that happen at high blood levels, and then you metabolize this stuff off. And so we started with the glutathione and vitamin C and lipoic acid for these detoxes, and then we came upon cannabinoids, and we did CBD, we did, of course, THC because we're from Colorado, and we licensed that out to people who do medical marijuana, and then we started getting out of detox into all this metabolic stuff, and so I started putting all these metabolic things together. We have immunological stuff. Now we have the NAD as well. And when you do it this way, it's just radical. So you asked about the 2 products you're taking. So you're taking the one. So the one, what name?
Pretty egotistical name, right?
What are you talking about? The idea was, if you're going to take one thing, it'll be a mitochondrial generator.
Right.
Now that I know what I know, I tack 1 or 2 more things in there, like the NAD. Yeah. So what was in there?
Then now you can make the other one.
The other one, the new one.
The new
there's
one.
like the right one. There's like a million jokes around it, and it was PQQ, resveratrol, and CoQ10 on one hand, and then phosphatidylcholine and some adaptogens. Mm-hmm. And the idea was mitochondrial. So phosphatidylcholine is building the membranes in there. Then PQQ and resveratrol are PGC1A activators. They activate mitochondrial biogenesis. So that's making new mitochondria. The PC is making healthy mitochondria. And the CoQ10 is flowing right into the mitochondrial activity and turning up its turnover in the electron transport chain. And then the adaptogens are just supporting the whole thing from a neuroadrenal level. Right. And so, you can kind of see the mitochondria as like the adrenals of the cell.
Right.
And when that integrity comes up, you start burning energy better. So now I know these are all AMPK activators. In fact, all the adaptogens, the best adaptogens all have a steroid backbone. And that was the carnivore MD was talking. He was like, well, the ring structure. And you're like, what's the ring structure? And, there's like 4 6-member rings, like hexagons, and there's a 5-member, maybe it's three hexagons and 1 pentagon. And that core is the same in every one of your hormones, and just little things around the outside change. So then the cool adaptogens, ginsenosides, astragalosides, gypenosides, they're from gynestemma, the withanolides from ashwagandha, all have this steroid backbone. They all look like hormones, but then they have different things around them. And so they help regulate this neuroadrenal hormonal axis. And so it's support to the whole thing.
Right.
Now, what I learned when I got deeper into NAD, so I'm always driving myself. How can I drive myself harder and harder? Now, I used to think I traveled like a dog, and then this year I beat all my travel records. Just totally squashed them.
But it's not beating you down as bad.
No, because what happens usually, I get home and then I'm like, you're tired and you're foggy. So when your adrenals are making all your anti-inflammatories, and they're putting control around things like your mast cells that are pro-inflammatory, and IgG, which is pro-inflammatory. So there's a balance between your immune system and your adrenals, and they're holding everything together.
Right.
And when that's ideal, you don't get sick and you don't get all like fogged out. But then when the adrenals can't hold it anymore, you get all fogged out. And what I would have to do, this is interesting, what I would do every morning when I get back from these trips is I'd have to do a sauna. And because I'd wake up, I'd drink my coffee, and it would fog me out.
Right.
And that's the mast cell activation, the histamine's coming out. You're like, And you get in the sauna and you get a deep sweat going. You get that heat shock proteins coming along with that. There's some biopterin generation, and boom, that's all gone.
Some what generation?
Tetrahydrobiopterin. This is part of the cycling of hydride groups and how you control a lot of this stuff around cortisol. And it would all clear up, but I'd have to do that every morning. And then once I got those NAD levels up, man, I didn't have to do any of that. Unless I really, really, really took it forward, then I might need that once in a while. But the NAD just took it up to such a level, and a big key to it is the sirtuins generating this metabolic clarity. And to have them activated, you need NAD. A sirtuin activator like resveratrol or PQQ or quercetin hypercharges it, and you have to be able to move away when the sirtuin uses NAD, it turns it back to nicotinamide.
Mm-hmm.
And nicotinamide then blocks the action of the sirtuin. So you have to be able to move the nicotinamide out of the way and bring a new NAD in. And the key to moving the nicotinamide out of the way is to methylate it and move it out.
Got it.
That's why I was saying you got to balance the methylation with the NAD, because people will start taking NAD precursors and they'll start feeling better, and then they'll just reach this limit. And they'll be like, well, it just wasn't sustainable. Then they got to start bringing up the methylation groups, because they're going to take away the wasted NAD and you're going to throw new stuff in. And then you can keep this thing generating at light speed.
Right. Well, you were talking about partying with Mercola, and I told you a quick story with the first time I had an NAD drip. My buddy Scott and I decided to race because the doc said, when you guys take this NAD, 1,000 milligrams maybe of NAD, you're going to feel like your heart's going to explode, your legs are going to explode, and you're just going to feel awful. So we decided to kind of race. But now talking to you, I probably should have just taken some methylation groups, and
and that race would have been fine. You'd have been like, no problem, baby. Why are you having such a hard time over there?
Right. But how does it? So if you're taking NMN, so I know when you get something like an IV drip of NAD. Generally, especially if you're over 50 or whatever the number is, you got to it's kind of like the old days of creatine where you got to load it up. You got to do, 2 big hits of it and then maybe go on more of a maintenance plan with the IVs. But when you're doing this, you had kind of talked about working your way up kind of the other way.
Yeah. With the liposomal delivery, this is a needle in a jar,
Right.
So you're getting this high dose in. And, the drips are, often they're trying to flip something that's really broken. But
Yeah.
I prefer more of this building up and then getting onto a nice strong pace. And it's funny, like the first couple times people take it, they'll have to take naps. They'll like go to sleep, and your autonomics go into re-regulation, and they're allowing you to go into a new program. It's a new metabolic program. You're going from this survival metabolic program to one of a younger person. And Klinghardt, when in the autonomic response testing, when they'll give something to somebody that like starts resetting their system, they'll go into what he calls yin state, and you can't muscle test them, and you feel like you're in like a conscious dreaming state.
Right.
And so a bunch of people I started this on would have to go and sleep right after the first couple of doses.
So
And
interesting.
yeah, and so I like to get the body ready for this new state and then start bringing it up to speed. And to bring it up to speed, you do have to have a lot of stuff in place. You have to be low on toxins, you have to have a lot of methyl groups, and you have to have a lot of sirtuin activators.
Right. Well, I got to share my experience now. So I've been on this little stack for
Yeah.
the last week and a half, 2 weeks. I'm sleeping less.
Yes.
I'm at 6 hours, I'm cool. And when I look at my data, it's all deep in REM.
It was crazy, man.
It's crazy.
My biggest problem forever that I've been looking at my Aura Ring and BioStrap and shit, I would get no shit. 10, 20 minutes max of deep sleep.
Yeah.
And so I needed to sleep a lot, despite how, was a wild man I was. When I come home, I just need to sleep a lot.
Right.
And now I'm getting 1 to 2 hours every freaking night.
Right.
And that's one of the NAD things is circadian rhythms.
Yeah.
And it's like you're up during the day and you're down at night. And now I wake up with my kids, they would get up and go to school. And fortunately, I got one old enough to drive the other to school, and I just wouldn't wake up until 8:30. and now I'm like, oh, hi guys, want some coffee? And my son's like, I'm 13, Dad. I'm like, oh, well, whatever. Glad I'm up.
Yeah, and that was the most remarkable thing, though, for sure, that I noticed is that because
Crazy.
since I was a little kid, I mean, my mom always tells a story about when I was 8 years old. I'd be like, well, it's about 8 o'clock. I better turn it in, because if I don't get 10 hours of sleep, I'm
a mess.
I'm gonna be a mess. And I've been, my parents never had to fight me going to bed. I always needed 8+ hours.
Oh, me too.
And now
No
I'm on this
longer.
like 6 hour thing.
Mhm.
And it's been really bizarre. And I've been kind of adding in also the Juve light, where in the morning I don't touch the white. I don't let white light hit me until like the time that I wish that I would sleep until, right? If it's sometimes I'm up at 5 and I'm ready. I'm ready. It doesn't matter. And so I think like it's kind of bookshelf in the day with the red light as well. And I'm curious on your thoughts on the red light on the mitochondria, and then the NAD and the one. It's pretty wild.
It's awesome, and I will definitely do the. So the one is the sirtuin activator, and then the NAD, is also doing that. And I'll do those, and I'll do the red light. So I got a whole wall. I think I got platinum LED, and I got a wall of those, and I'm trying to figure that all out. Like I did, I run a lot of it intuitively, but it's like red light is a end of day light. It's not, morning is more of a blue light. And so that's why, like when people wear blue light blockers, I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Like if they're wearing them at like 10 a.m. in the morning,
right.
because
the full-time blue blocking.
The blue, that's what wakes you up. That wakes up your adrenals and like turns everything back on. And so like when I would travel too much, my adrenals are down, I go out and use sky gaze. This is, all the old lineages had sky gazing, and they had sun gazing too, which is, an advanced form. But the blue light is morning, and then the red light is night. And so I wonder, do we do better with it at night? But I'll do it in the morning a lot too, because it's like the only chance I get. And then there's like, do you go close? Do you go far away? They're very different.
Yeah.
When I'm resetting adrenals, I'm like right up against the thing, and I'm banging all these things, and I let that help reset.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love it. I know it's working on the mitochondria. Have I figured out everything around there? No, I think that we'll learn more about how more effectively to use it. Let me just throw one more thing in. When you're bringing up your NAD levels, what you're going to find when you're not getting it quite right. So when you get it right, the fog goes away, the energy's up. So the fuzz, the metabolic fuzz is gone and you're up. And then when you get something wrong, the fuzz comes back. And you either need, in the beginning, it's usually a combination of antioxidants and methylation groups. NADPH oxidase gets overwound and starts making, I think, superoxide. It interacts with iron, especially if you're high iron, like a Viking like me. Like, I'm supposed to be bleeding all the time in battle, and I don't, so I got too much iron.
Got it.
And so you wind up free radical damage for that. And so when the fog comes on, a combination of methyl groups and glutathione or C will calm that down. And you'll see you calm down and your energy comes up, your clarity comes up. So these are the different levers that you're pushing to start bringing your levels up. And as they stabilize, you don't need the antioxidants as much. When you're burned out a little bit, then you'll need them more.
Right. Well, it seems like, that's a big theme of this conversation is that yin and yang,
Yeah.
right? Like it doesn't matter if it's the blue blocks or if it's antioxidants or if it's diet, it's fasting, it's feeding.
Yeah.
It seems like you talked about the vibration. We need
Yeah.
that rhythm.
Yeah, you need that rhythm. And you were asking me earlier about antioxidants, and there was definitely, like, especially in the fat solubles, vitamin A, vitamin E, they've got their place. They're fantastic. They're great therapeutics. But when people were megadosing those for a long time and they were thinking that was going to stop their cancer, they rose the cancer rates.
Yeah.
Some of those interventions went exactly the opposite. So you need enough of the fat solubles to put the free radical quenching into your membranes, but you don't want to drive antioxidant behavior in your body with those. You want glutathione to drive that. And glutathione is, you need enough protein to build it because it's made from cysteine, glycine, and glutamine, and protein deficient diets have low glutathione. But it's those hormetic things that help bring that up. And those would be, the things like lipoic acid and polyphenols, and they help bring that up. And vitamin C, I think, is safe to use lots of. Some people, do real high doses. They do IVs and stuff. But if you're blanketed with C all the time, it's actually an inhibitor of NRF2 because it blocks the little free radical generation that's starting your stress response. So I don't like to use that to drive the system all the time. But in a crutching type of thing where, I've got obvious free radical stuff going on in my brain, I'll throw C in there.
Got it. Makes sense. All right, Dr. Shade, this has been a great time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any kind of final thoughts that you want to toss in here?
Yeah, I want to encourage everybody to see the whole thing with holism.
Right.
And vitalism. These are old things. And that was what everybody was always after in the Taoist and Ayurvedic lineages, but they didn't really know the chemistry around it. And now we do. And so we've got tools where we can push different levers and such. But it's not just the biochemical, it's your whole application to the world and what your sensing of things are. So we talked about sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic, you're sensing danger. As long as you're sensing danger in your environment, you're going to be chronically down-regulating your own inner nurturing, your own healing response. And so you've got to change your own perception of these things. They'll be the same whether you see them as a blessing or as a curse to you. But when you see things as a blessing, and the more you can have gratitude, and I used to because I come from this, in my Buddhist lineages, they used to joke about California Buddhism. Oh, I get the pretty incense, and that one's too smelly, and it's very fluffy and it's not real.
Yeah.
But and there's a lot of gratitude talk. There's cafe gratitude and stuff. A lot of it's fluffy and fake.
Yeah.
But it is really real. If you go and you put your heart rate variability on, and you're measuring your parasympathetic response, you can do deep breathing, and it's not changing as much as you want. But you do deep breathing with that inner bliss, that what Mantak Chia calls the inner smile, and often people talk about gratitude. All of a sudden, it changes.
Right.
So when you change your perception of that world around you, that is starting the whole healing. And then everything that you do on top of that, you'll feel more and more blessed with every intervention that you put in.
Yeah, man, that's beautiful. And I think I think it's so common these days for people to have a problem, whether it's in their gut or if it's chronic pain or whatever,
And associate with it.
and they associate with it because they got bounced around and no one knew, no one had an answer. And all of a sudden, the world is an unfair place and there's a victim mindset and there's an
Absolutely.
identity. And I feel like a lot of folks that I talk to, I try to help understand that, but it's a very tough nut to crack once someone is kind of stuck in
Once
that
their
space.
identity, because the root chakra is stronger than all of them. Our sense of identity, our sense of being. It's not identity as much as being. I exist. And I exist as this. I exist as the sick person, or I exist as whatever it is. But once their existence is predicated on the victimhood, to take away the victimhood takes away their whole existence.
Right,
And so you've got to replace it with being the blessed one.
right. All right. Dr. Shade, thank you so much, my man.
Thank you.
Where can people find you?
QuicksilverScientific.com. You can buy our products there. You can find education there. But the big repository of education is on our YouTube channel.
Okay.
Look for our Quicksilver Scientific YouTube channel.
Got it.
There's 30 plus hour and a half long webinars there talking about lots of these different subjects. Plenty of education.
All right. And we'll link to all that. And I'll just, I guess, close this episode. Very grateful for Dr. Mercola for squeezing your fat that day.
Yeah. There to the Dark Lord. I love to call him that. And I have a slide of him looking all menacing.
Well, that was the first domino, it seems.
It was, man. He woke me up to that. And it woke me up to all this stuff. And so we have a great relationship.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Shade. All right, guys, we're going to put links to everything in the show notes. So stay tuned and check out Dr. Shade and Quicksilver Scientific. Over and out.